Hey guys, it's Dean. Welcome to the Better Man podcast. Today I am rejoined by Adam Sud. We had a fantastic conversation last time. Brought him on to finish up our conversation. If you didn't hear from Adam the first time, Adam is a nutritional and behavioral health expert. He's a former food addict and now the founder of the Plant-Based for Positive Change nonprofit. Adam, welcome back. Thanks for rejoining me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have this conversation. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a valuable conversation to have. A lot of people get a little charged on this one.
Oh yeah, I mean, so if you, anyways, so whether you heard the last conversation or not, so we actually had this, we had a previous interview where we wanted to focus on too many things, and I realized, okay, maybe you guys won't want to listen to a 2-hour podcast. I also don't know if I have the mental capacity to have a conversation for 2 hours, quite honestly. So I was like, okay, why don't we let's do a follow-up interview, and in this discussion, we are going to talk everything vegan.
Yeah,
I'm and I told Adam before we started this conversation, I'm gonna come at this like somebody who's totally ignorant of being vegan, because in a lot of ways I am. And I'm also going to ask a lot of questions from the perspective that I see, which is, I think most people, I think a lot, I think I can only speak for myself. A lot of my interactions with vegans aren't the ones where it's like a nice, like, oh, I'm vegan, and if you eat meat, that's okay. It's kind
right.
of like, if you're not vegan, it's like well, if you're not with us, you're against us. And it's kind of at least the interactions that I've had are not overwhelmingly positive when it comes to someone who comes out
Sure.
and is militantly vegan. So I want to have a conversation with somebody who is going to, answer a lot of the questions that I have, but in a factual manner rather than, and we talked about this, but a lot of vegan information is really vegan propaganda, and it's not accurate. So anyways, what are your what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
man.
that, Adam? How
I'm
do we
happy.
get it? How do we start this?
Yeah, I'm happy to have this conversation. And to be fair, like I completely understand where you're coming from when you make the statement. A lot of times when I interact with people who identify as living a vegan lifestyle, someone who is living a vegan lifestyle, that there seems to be more confrontation than conversation.
Hmm.
And I find that to be common, unfortunately. I find it to be ineffective. And I also find it not to be my experience. I'll tell you, I told you before we started this call, I never decided to live a plant exclusive vegan lifestyle as a result of someone yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
I was given the opportunity to discover what was possible through accurate information,
Mm-hmm.
right? Someone saying, hey, guess what? Why don't you? I mean, I had a unique situation where my life was kind of on the line. And as a result of attempting to recover my health at a very extreme situation, I adopted a plant exclusive lifestyle in order to reverse certain chronic disease conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of witnessing the value that existed for me within that environment, a plant exclusive environment, I decided to then investigate what other impacts are happening as a result of my life, no longer including things that would be requiring animal life in order to sustain things like leather, things like animal entertainment, like rodeos and
So are
things like
you
that.
are you full, like, not just
I
diet but
am,
also like, okay.
yeah, I live a vegan lifestyle and I eat a plant exclusive diet. I think
Mm.
those two are really important to differentiate. No food is vegan. People are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a carrot isn't by nature vegan. A carrot is a healthy food, period,
Mm-hmm.
end of story. Does it fit into the lifestyle that a person who is vegan would consider part of their lifestyle? Yes, it does. But I think in labeling food as vegan food versus non-vegan food, that's where the argument starts happening. Like, wait, hang on a second. Like, and then you have the whole idea that vegan by nature means healthy, which is also not accurate. And
Hmm.
so what I'd like to get in today is having discussions on what is accurate. How do we support people who are curious? Maybe not in looking at, I want to eliminate animal products from my life entirely, but I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious. Gosh, there's all this conversation about, plant-based this, plant-based that. And, I'm kind of intrigued here and I want to do it, but I don't know how, right? So
Hmm.
maybe helping someone feel a little bit more confident in how to do that and how to do that well.
Yeah, I think one of my perceptions is that people go into a vegan diet assuming that if they follow things according to vegan guidelines that they're going to be healthier, but you can
Sure.
be very unhealthy eating a vegan diet. A lot of the vegan substitutes, like if you grab like a vegan substitute meat from like the frozen aisle and you turn
Yeah.
it around and you look at the nutritional information, you're like, oh wow, there's a lot of sodium, there's a lot of unnecessary things in it. And so in the name of being healthier, you're having something that is actually not healthy. And then you like you pick up a piece of steak and you look at,
Yeah.
well, I don't think there's nutritional info on a piece of steak, but that
Well,
would
there's
be
not
me.
there shouldn't be that many ingredients in it, but there should be nutrition information. But
Yeah.
that's a great place to start, right?
Mm,
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about someone who is in a situation where they're curious for various reasons. They want to start replacing calories coming from animal products with calories coming from plant products. And
hmm.
what would be the accurate way to do that? And how would we go about facilitating meeting the needs of that individual nutritionally, either just based on how do I live healthy versus preferred lifestyle of like someone who's an athlete?
Hmm.
Okay, so number one, if this is something you're interested in doing, fantastic. There should be no concern that if done well, you're going to be hindering yourself in any aspect of human health outcomes over the course of time. However, there's an asterisk there if done well, right? So let's
Hmm.
be honest here, right? Vegan doesn't mean healthy. Oreos are vegan. Potato chips are vegan. Technically, they're vegan foods if you want to call it that. They fit into a vegan lifestyle, right? So
Okay.
none of these are going to, what I would say, increase the quality of your dietary pattern. And that's
Hmm.
really important because what we end up doing when we have these conversations is we try to compare food to food, right? So like Beyond Meat to a steak, right?
Hmm.
And say, oh, well, there you go. So that I understand the interest in doing that, but that's not a valuable conversation.
Mm.
What we want to look at is if we're going to make a change, we're not going to change from eating an omnivorous diet to eating just Beyond Meat. So we
Hmm.
have to look at the dietary pattern as a whole and how appropriate replacements into that dietary pattern can either insult the quality of it or increase the quality of it, promote the quality of it. That
So would
could,
you say that those substitute things are those more like are those I guess what am I trying to ask? So are those substitute things that I mentioned, like those substitute meats, are those just so like if you're vegan, you want to kind of like fit in with like what everybody else is eating? You're like, oh, here's
yeah.
like it's like it's it's not going to be, it's not like a healthy food, but you like, okay,
Yeah.
this at least allows me to practice my eating beliefs and
Well,
kind of
so actually,
fit in.
if you look at the data,
Hmm.
the majority of people who purchase Beyond Meat, Impossible, all those things don't
Hmm.
identify as vegan. So
Oh.
technically, these foods are really for people who are trying to offset meat consumption or people who are trying to transition themselves from a meat heavy diet to a more plant predominant diet. And so
Hmm.
they're kind of like they're like a transitional tool
Hmm.
that allows you to feel like you're having what you had before while also recognizing and being able to include other things with ease and repeatability, right? If you go out to a restaurant with your friends and let's say you eat out 3, 4 times a week,
Yeah.
and this restaurant that you go to, you used to always get the cheeseburger, and now they have a Beyond Burger, and you're trying to eat less red meat.
Hmm.
That's a great opportunity for that person who's curious about that. Now, like I said, is it the optimal choice? No, it isn't.
Mm.
Okay. One of the problems that I have with these Beyond products and the Impossible products, while they taste fantastic, is that in terms of human health outcomes over time, the presence of saturated fat and the percentage of calories coming from saturated fat is still going to be problematic.
Mm.
Is it going to be the most problematic food you can get? No, but that's not also what we're looking for. We're not trying to compare it to the worst. We're
Yeah.
trying to look at it in terms of what is accurate. And so let's just say a person was like, okay, so what is accurate here? Well, if I wanted to build a plant exclusive lifestyle, how would I do that in a way that promotes health outcomes over the course of time and allows me to feel really well? The best way to do that is to try to organize your caloric environment to look like what would be considered and what would be determined as a whole food, plant based lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So, what you're doing is you're getting your calories from foods in their whole intact or minimally processed state.
Mm-hmm.
Minimally processed meaning things like hummus, which is chickpeas, but there's been a machine processing. It's not chemically processed, machine
Mm-hmm.
processed. So now it's been pureed as kind of a form of preparation, right?
Okay.
So that could be considered a minimally processed food. Whole grain pastas are a minimally processed food. Whole
Mm-hmm.
grain breads are a minimally processed food. But the majority of your calories you want coming from the beans and the greens, the grains, the soy products like tempeh and tofu,
Mm-hmm.
fruits, starches, and non-starchy vegetables. If you can organize your calories to fit into that category, you're going to do really well most of the time for the majority
Mm-hmm.
of people. Depending on your preferred lifestyle, you make some alterations on your macros and what percentage of calories are coming from which macronutrient in order to facilitate the needs of someone who's trying to build muscle or sustain muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that brings up
So
a really big topic, right? Which is
yeah.
the protein topic.
Yes. So like, and just going through everything you just said, most people aren't like, I'll be honest, I'm not super knowledgeable about
Yeah.
diet. And like, if you ask me to write, like people ask me to write them like a meal plan, I'm like, no, I don't know how. Like
Yeah.
I know how to eat healthy foods, but like as far as like understanding how many macros like
Yeah.
everyone should be eating, like what breakdown of each different type of food and how many grams of this, how many
Yeah.
grams of that. What I know is I know that I should be aiming for like 100 grams of protein a day. That's what I know.
It's exactly accurate.
And
That's
that's like
100% right.
and I know I know what I need to know for my fitness goals. And like
Yeah.
I think my body is where I want it to be in terms of overall fat percentage and the
Yeah.
ability to build muscle and feel, like I'm recovering from my workouts.
Sure.
Um, and I bring all this up because if I don't know all of those things, like the
Yeah.
average person who
Yeah.
hears like, I would like to be vegan, let me do it, and they don't know all those things, like
Yeah.
how are they going to be successful with it, right?
It's a really great. It's a really great question, and there's
Mm-hmm.
some phenomenal resources to help you figure out how to organize your calories in order to be successful. There's websites, plantstrong.com,
Mm-hmm.
gamechangers.com, forks over knives. These are going to give you recipes that for the majority of people,
Mm-hmm.
these are the kinds of um, arrangement of calories is going to do really well for you. But let's actually talk about that. Let's
Yeah.
talk about,
I
for an
I
example.
interrupted you on the protein thing because that was one of
Yeah.
my questions. I'm like, wow, that's what
Yeah.
everyone says. They're like, but
Yeah.
how do you get enough protein,
Yeah,
right?
so that's a really great question. And I want to be incredibly honest and accurate here because I think it is valuable to be honest rather than just say, oh, you never have to worry about protein. Don't
Mm-hmm.
worry about it. And that's the common thing you're going to hear is you'll never. So this is the thing. And this kind of irks me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
This irks me a little bit. When we talk about the protein topic, what most vegans are going to say is, well, protein is in every food. Yeah, I know. We know that. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't know that, now you do.
Mm-hmm.
All plants contain protein. And actually, all plants are complete proteins. So, what is a complete protein? A complete protein is a protein that contains all 9 essential amino acids. And an essential amino acid means it is an amino acid that your body cannot produce on its own. So, it is essential that you get it from your diet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there are 9 essential amino acids, and then you have additional amino acids that your body can synthesize on its own. So in order to consume a complete amino acid profile, the foods that you eat need to have all 9 essential amino acids in order to be considered a complete protein.
Mm.
All plants contain all 9 essential amino acids. Here's the kicker, though. This is interesting. This is important. Where you start to see some debate is that a lot of the plant foods are limited in specific amino acids within those 9 essentials. So
Okay.
in order to get your RDA of all 9 essential amino acids, you would have to eat a variety of plants. Well, guess what? No one's just eating oats. This is kind of like the straw man argument, the kind of, deflection is like, well, oats, if you look at oats, they don't have enough, or if you look at whatever, they don't have enough of a specific one of the essential amino acids. So even if you ate all your calories, you wouldn't get the RDA of that. Yeah, but when you eat a complete diet, you do end up getting everything you need. So
Okay.
that I just want to say, yes, it's true that some plant protein, that some plant foods are not as rich in all 9 amino acids. However, they all do contain all 9 amino acids, and very easy to make sure that you get it. You just have to eat a varied diet, which is what most of us do. We're not just sitting down and eating brown rice, right? We're eating brown rice and black beans and oats for breakfast and greens and potatoes and all these kinds of things. The second thing is, when we talk about protein, it's important to know, okay, if I'm an athlete, what is the appropriate amount to get? What is the appropriate amount to get? And the research has been really clear on this, that in order to optimize hypertrophy, which is a new muscle synthesis, and strength adaptation for athletes, the optimal target is between 1.2 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body weight. The interesting thing about this is when they studied protein intake on these factors like hypertrophy and muscle strength or strength adaptation, they found that getting more than 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight does no added benefit. So while, yes, it's important to get enough protein, getting as much as you can doesn't really benefit you. Okay?
Okay.
There was a study that came out in 2021 by a researcher named Victoria Hevia Lorraine. And it was published in the Journal of Sports Medicine. And this was a study to look at protein-matched vegan diets versus omnivorous diets, specifically on resistance training adaptations, hypertrophy, and strength. Okay? This is really, so what they did was they took healthy men. One group was a plant-exclusive group. The other group was an omnivore group. They matched protein intake to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So each person was getting the optimal amount of protein intake based on their size. And then they put them through a training period where they were looking at increases in leg strength. Okay, so they're looking at two things: increases in muscle mass within the legs and increases in muscle output. So how much stronger were the legs and how much more size was added. After the study, when they looked at the comparisons, they found that there was no statistically significant difference between the two groups. That whether you got your calories from plants and animals, or whether you got them from just plants, as long as you were hitting that target of 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, it didn't matter. It didn't matter where the protein came from. Now, that is specifically on an outcome like strength adaptation and hypertrophy. But for athletes, that's really important because so much of us still believe in order to really benefit from our exercises, we should be including things like meat, eggs, and dairy, when in fact the research is really clear that you don't. There was another study that was published in 2020 that looked at protein intake across the board, all sources of plant protein versus all sources of animal protein. And again, what they found was that in terms of hypertrophy, in regards to muscle adaptation, as long as you were getting between 1.2 and 1.6, it didn't matter where the protein was coming from. It didn't matter. So that's really important. For that person who's like, oh, but I'm an athlete. I'm an athlete. I don't know what to do. I have to. No, you don't. In fact, there's no downside to replacing any amount of protein coming from animals with any amount of protein coming from plants in regards to your performance. That's important. That's really important because that's a barrier of entry that we used to say was really high. Well, now we've kind of lowered it with research, and I think that's valuable. So in terms of getting enough protein, does it require a little bit more planning and a little bit more strategy with a plant-based diet than it does an animal-based diet? Of course it does. How could it not? But just because it requires a little bit more planning and strategy Does it make it hard? No.
Mm.
That's a really important factor. So I get between 130 and 170 grams of protein per day, but when I consume anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 calories. So I do start my day with a protein powder supplement. So I add protein powder to my smoothie in the morning, and that's about the only time I'm going to use protein powder. Everything else is coming from protein-rich foods like lentils, tofu, tempeh, seitan, and even things like edamame pasta, which is, oh my gosh, if you've never had edamame pasta, it is remarkably good. And I mean, the macro split on this thing is about 180 calories per serving with 27 grams of protein for every 180 calories. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's like, I mean, that is a gold mine of opportunity. Plus, it's got 14 grams of fiber, which is just, the average American is so deficient in fiber. The RDA is asking people get around 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. The average American is getting between 5 and 10. And that is why we have a laxative industry that is about a $2 to $3 billion industry a year that is completely unnecessary.
Wow.
So when we talk about protein, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about losing performance. You don't have to worry about not being able to get enough. You can easily do it. And there are amazing resources. I highly recommend the gamechangers.com website. The Game Changers Institute is specifically designed to look at the cross section between professional athletes and plant-based diets.
Okay.
So that is the place to go if you're inclined to be like, hey, I'm an athlete, I want to know about this protein thing. I'm going to go to gamechangers.com and look at the Game Changers Institute. The chief scientific advisor is a guy named David Goldman. He's about the smartest human I've ever met in my life. He is remarkably brilliant, and he is a sports scientist. So highly, highly, highly recommend that website. Now, when it comes to other things, one of the biggest misconceptions is the presence of carbohydrate energy in a plant-based diet. Because by nature, a plant-based diet is going to be a higher carbohydrate diet simply because of the presence of plants. And plants are the primary source of carbohydrate energy. So people are like, well, wait a minute, hang on a second.
Yeah.
I don't want to gain weight. What am I going to do with all these carbs? I mean, so to be fair, I eat between 300 and 400 grams of carbohydrate a day. People are like,
and generally speaking, if you're trying to either lose weight or to maintain, and you don't have an athletic lifestyle where you need a ton of carbs, how many carbs should you be having per day? What's the general?
Yeah.
If you weren't on a vegan diet, what would?
This is a great question, and I really love talking about this because this is really where the majority of the misinformation exists. That carbohydrate energy is by nature a greater promoter of weight gain than any other macronutrient. That is the general consensus that people who are uninformed about nutrition generally tend to believe, that carbohydrate energy by nature promotes weight gain. It's just fundamentally untrue. So carbohydrate energy is simply a macronutrient, meaning it's a nutrient that contains calories. And there's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate, just like there's 4 calories per gram of protein, and there's 9 calories per gram of dietary fat. But when we look at weight gain and weight loss studies, when we look at studies that include a greater percentage of calories coming from whole, intact, carbohydrate-rich foods, you see that as the presence of these foods increases in the dietary pattern, in fact, weight gain is more easily achieved. And I'm going to talk about this from the standpoint of something called calorie density. Have you ever heard of this term, calorie density?
I have.
Yeah, so calorie
I
density.
don't know what it means, but I know it exists.
So calorie density is a really interesting topic, and it's an incredibly useful one to understand if you're looking at weight loss as a primary outcome for your efforts with nutrition. So calorie density is a term used to explain the amount of calories present in a specific weight of a specific food. And that expression is usually said as calories per pound. So what they're talking about is how many calories are in a pound of any specific food. There's a whole calorie density chart that you can look at. And there was about 50 studies done out of Penn State alone under a researcher named Dr. Barbara Rolls. She did all the foundational work on calorie density, and she wrote a book called Volumetrics. And so when you combine the science of calorie density and volumetrics, you get to a real understanding of how you actually achieve weight loss with ease. Number one of the most remarkable studies that she did was she just went and she observed people. She went and watched them. She didn't ask them to change their diet. She didn't put them on a specific diet. And people were eating all kinds of diets. And what she discovered was that regardless of your diet, the average person eats between 3 and 5 pounds of food per day. That's what we do. Your body doesn't count calories. It's not actually designed to count calories. Your body is designed by nature throughout the course of our evolutionary story to understand that a specific weight of food is equal to enough energy to stay alive. Okay? So when we understand that by nature, humans are driven to eat about 4 pounds of food per day, we can apply calorie density science to that understanding in order to design a diet that allows us to eat to satiety and either consume in a calorie deficit or in a caloric surplus, depending on our goals. So let's look at some of the most high carbohydrate rich foods that everyone says when you eat them, they cause you to gain weight. And let's see which actually accurate. Let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the potato. All right. So the potato is probably unanimously considered by the average person out there weight gain central. No, I can't have those potatoes. They make you gain weight. It's all sugar. It's all starch, and starch causes weight gain. Well, let's look at what's accurate and let's look at the data. Number one, the calorie density of a potato is 390. What that means is if you ate a pound of cooked potatoes, you would consume 390 calories. It's quite a low calorie dense food. And in the calorie density scale, the lowest calorie dense foods happen to be low fat plant foods. So greens, beans, grains, fruits, starches, non-starchy vegetables, they go from anywhere from 60 calories per pound to 600 calories per pound. So if we're looking at potatoes, and if I was to say to you, hey, I bet you that if you went out and ate to satiety of only potatoes, you would likely end the day in a caloric deficit. Well, let's look at the data here. If the average person consumes about 4 pounds of food per day, and they ate only potatoes, which is about 400 calories per pound, the average person would consume 1,600 calories, which puts them in a calorie deficit. The reality is potatoes are some of the best weight loss foods in existence. What happens is people start putting on top of those potatoes things like sour
Ketchup.
cream.
Stuff.
Exactly.
Calories.
Things that actually have a calorie density of between 1 and 4,000 calories per pound. When you're in that calorie density range, there's no way to moderate. There's no way to portion control. And let me explain to you how this works. Let's take a food like cooked oats. Cooked oats are 300 calories per pound. I love oatmeal. I eat it every morning. Now let's look at oat bread. Oat bread is 1,300 calories per pound because the water's been removed, okay? Now you're probably saying to yourself, Adam, I don't know anyone eating a pound of oat bread. Why does this matter? It matters for a very specific reason. And the reason for this is no matter how much oats you eat, and no matter how much oat bread you eat, it will always be nearly 5 times easier to consume more calories than you planned on if your diet contains more oat bread than more whole oats. Does that make sense? If you're eating foods like beans, which are 450 calories per pound, and you're eating them in their whole intact state, and you put oil on it, which is 4,200 calories per pound, no matter how much oil you eat, it will always be 10 times easier for you to consume additional calories than you want to if your beans contain oil in them than if they were just cooked in water. This is really important to understand that it isn't the specific food itself, but the calorie density of your total dietary pattern, the average calorie density of your total dietary pattern that will influence weight loss or weight gain. The biggest influence of weight loss and weight gain is calorie deficit or calorie surplus. In fact, when we look at studies that trace adipose fat, right? So fat stores in your adipose tissue, and we trace the origin of those, what we have discovered is that less than 2% of your stored body fat originated from carbohydrate energy. So carbohydrate energy can be converted to fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. That is the conversion of carbohydrate energy to fat in the liver, then it's excreted out. So it can happen, but only in a caloric excess. 98% of your body's stored fat originated from fat energy, okay? However, whether you're eating a high-fat diet or a low-fat diet, what is going to make you store that fat is simply being in a calorie surplus. So there isn't a single food that by nature or macronutrient that by nature causes weight gain.
Mhm.
The quality of your dietary pattern and the calorie density of your dietary pattern is the influence here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that if if you were just to eat the plants that we're talking about, if you were just to eat potatoes, if you were just to eat, I don't know, lentils, let's say some
Yeah.
other, if you were just to eat those,
Mhm.
then
And your
you,
energy balance was right? If you were
mhm,
eating for your energy balance, meaning that you knew at the end of the day you were in a calorie deficit or in a calorie surplus if you're trying to gain weight, you will
mhm.
either gain weight or lose weight. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with the source of the food.
Yeah.
However, the
The
health
problem
outcomes.
is the
Go
problem
ahead.
then is the problem is when you're adding the sweeteners, the sauces, the oils, that's
Yes.
the issue.
That is
Is
the
that
issue because
okay?
those are very hard to manage because they're so calorie rich. Can
Mm,
you have them? Sure. The problem is most people are having them for every meal every day.
mm,
I'm not saying ketchup causes weight gain, but if you're slathering ketchup on your food, if you're slathering butter on your food, if you're slathering, oil on your food at every meal for everything you eat, you're going to
mm,
find it very difficult to get into a calorie deficit.
mhm.
Those foods are just too calorie rich. That's the
Yeah.
problem. They're not inherently evil. They're
Mhm.
just very calorie rich foods. And that's why they promote weight gain. It's not because of how much carbohydrate or how much fat they have, it's how much calories they have.
Yeah. And the more you use them, the harder it becomes to not use them because you're desensitizing your taste buds.
That's exactly right. You're desensitizing your dopamine pathways for whichever specific macronutrient is incredibly
Mm,
rich in that food, right? So what happens, and we talked about this in the last call, is that when you hit your dopamine pathways with a supernormal stimulus, a stimulus like hyper concentrations of salt, hyper concentrations of fat, hyper concentrations of sugar, those
mhm,
dopamine pathways, those receptors defend themselves against that intense stimulus and they dull their receptibility so
mhm.
that you never really experience that pleasure on like a super normal dopamine lift. It
Yeah.
will calibrate down into what is an acceptable normal range for the human experience.
Mhm.
So that at that point, in order to feel what feels like the appropriate amount of pleasure from food, you have to continue eating those foods, or
Yeah.
else it's
So
just
like
going to feel bland.
so then my question is how do you make things taste, so I kind of if you look at I'll just say this. If you look at the nutritional information of spices, there's nothing in them. If you look at
Yes,
like
no,
chili
that's
powder,
right.
if you look at paprika, if you look at
You're
cumin,
absolutely
right?
right.
Like these are all things that taste awesome if you know how
Yes,
to use them, but they don't have
they have no
calories.
calories.
There's
They
there's
don't have
nothing.
any calories.
And there's
No,
lots of
they're
benefits that come from certain spices.
They're the
They have
most they're the most antioxidant rich sources on the planet are
mm,
spices. Spices are incredibly valuable to your dietary pattern. And so spices and seasonings, that's how you change the culinary experience of whatever you're
okay.
eating.
Yeah, that was
You
my
know,
question is how do you make
yeah.
it taste good? Like how do you
Yeah.
because
Like so for example, if I'm
no
eating.
one's gonna eat a bland potato 4 times a day.
Right. And to be fair, no one wants to eat just plain chicken either. You're going to
Right.
season that thing, right? You're
Right.
going to season it. You're going to make it taste different. Sometimes you're going to have a Tex-Mex blend of spices. Some days you might have
Mhm.
an Asian blend of spices so that while it's the same food, it has a different culinary experience that's exciting. And
Mm.
so really what you're doing, you're just trying to change your perception of what it is to eat a meal. A lot of people believe that if meat isn't on the plate, then it isn't a meal. So I
Mhm.
understand the difficulty to come to what looks like a plate of sides and see that, and see that as a meal, but that's really
Yeah.
the biggest hurdle.
That's
Now,
something
when it,
that you do hear from
yeah,
people is people who have tried doing a vegan diet or people who have done both is yeah, like I'm not having meat and it's weird like I don't finish a meal feeling full
yeah,
anymore.
and that is twofold. Number
Mhm.
one, by nature, your meals might, in the beginning, because you haven't figured out how to appropriately strategize around protein-rich foods,
Mhm.
might feel less satiating because of the lower presence of protein. Protein is a
Mhm.
satiating macronutrient,
Mhm.
as well as a lower fat diet. So, fat is actually a very satiating macronutrient because fat takes a lot more stomach acid to break down. So,
Mhm.
you have a filling experience as your stomach fills with more stomach acid in order to break it down. And
Huh.
it lasts longer in your stomach. It takes a little bit longer to empty fat rich foods into your bloodstream than it does, say, carbohydrate rich foods or protein rich foods. And so, not only do you feel fuller, but you might feel fuller longer. And so that is the number one reason why diets like the ketogenic diet, people go, I'm not hungry. Like I never feel hungry. Like I
Mhm.
eat, I'm just good. And that's simply because of the presence of saturated fat and fat rich calories that mechanism is taking place.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Got it. You were saying something before, and I got excited about whatever I was asking you about just now. What were you saying before? Right
Yeah,
before
I
I
was.
cut you off.
Yeah, so what we were talking about was just learning how to experience the change in the composition of your plate,
Yeah.
right? That now you've switched from something that had a very it's been culturally part of your experience, it's been
Yeah.
socially part of your experience, it's been historically part of your experience, or that's what food looks like.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't have it, then the meal ain't over, right? So there is
Yeah.
a level of adjustment that has to occur. And so understanding really why you're trying to do this and why it's important for you to do this is going to be a big factor in sustainability, right?
Mhm.
Why does it matter that you get to a point where it doesn't feel hard anymore? What
Mhm.
is so darn important that this effort, this potentially extraordinary effort, is worth it to you? And
Mhm.
identifying that reason is going to be very valuable for anyone trying to make any significant change in their life,
Right.
whether it's quitting smoking or whether it's changing to eating plants or whether it's drinking less alcohol. All of these things are going to feel like extraordinary efforts, and if you don't have a reason that's
Mhm.
rooted in your effort, there's not a why that's there that's important to you and meaningful and rooted in some valuable outcome over time, you're
Mhm.
likely to just, you know, we don't mind being martyrs for ourselves. We don't, well, whatever, I'll just do it next year. Who cares? Like
Got it.
you would likely root this, if you saw your friend doing it and they were like, I don't think I'm going to do it anymore. You'd likely cheer them on. You're like, oh, come on, man, you got this. But we,
Yeah.
we typically, kind of we don't give ourselves the same amount of support that we would give our best friend, which I think is one of the biggest things I ask people when I work with is we're going to learn how to be uh, like teammates for ourselves. We're gonna
Mhm.
start to talk to ourselves as if we were watching our best friend go through this,
Yeah.
and we're never going to talk to ourselves the way that we have been, which is like, well, I just must be lazy as shit because I
Mhm.
can't do it, and that person over there did it, and therefore they must be different than me. They're not different than
Mhm.
you. You got to start saying, hey, no, man, I know it's hard, but you got this. Like, this is like you've made it 5 days already, or you made it 5 months already, or you've made it, 10 months already. Like, that's fantastic. You
Mhm.
got this. Just go one more day. Like, exactly as you would talk to your best friend. That's how you're going
Mhm.
to start to embody that inner voice of yourself.
Gotcha. Yeah, we
Yeah.
talked about that. How people we talked about that in our last episode. How people
Yeah.
can't conceptualize long term, but
Yeah.
if we break something down to like a 20-day goal, then we're
Yeah.
like, okay, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I can do
Yeah.
4 weeks. Let me get
Exactly.
my star chart. I almost want to get. Hold on, I'm gonna get this out. Come on.
Yeah.
I, I don't know if you can see this,
Yes.
but I keep these star charts. I've had these since I moved, and I am not like I'm not like a pack rat at all. So if I don't need something, I throw it away.
That is
But I'm like,
amazing.
I'm gonna use these star. These are like the same star
Yeah.
charts. If you don't have the video version right now, basically, I'm
Yeah.
showing those star charts that you see in kindergarten classes, where you get like a star if you showed up to class that day.
Yeah.
I have those because they're actually remarkable for accountability, and
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what my next thing to hold myself accountable to doing is.
Yeah.
Um,
So I
anyways,
know
sorry, I
last
got
time
really
we
excited about
talked,
my star chart.
last time we talked, you brought up the topic of something that was said in the movie called What the Health, and
Oh
and
yeah,
uh, and I really want to touch on this topic because it's something that I actually am an expert in, which is insulin sensitivity and insulin
okay.
resistance, and so I really want to talk about this, and so I'll let you kind of bring it up here.
Yeah, so that was one other thing that we discussed. Like, there's a lot of, you know, you've come at this conversation. Let's talk about like the facts behind
Yes.
what happens when you're eating a vegan diet, and a lot of the more common um, promoters,
Yes.
champions of a vegan diet come at this more from the perspective of you're killing the environment if
Yeah.
you don't adopt a vegan diet. Um, if you don't have a vegan diet, you have what's called the standard American diet,
Right.
and you're incredibly unhealthy. And meat is unhealthy by nature, and you shouldn't eat meat. And a lot of these, we're living on Netflix for most of our
Yeah.
and we're living on these video streamers for most of our consumption. And whenever one of these new vegan propaganda, I mean vegan informational videos are released,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're they get tons. Everyone
Yeah.
watches them. You're like, oh, number two in movies today, or number two in
Yeah.
documentaries today, or number one in documentaries today. And I kind of live in a social media world where I see both the people who are promoting them as well as the people who are like looking at these movies and picking them apart and saying like that's not
Sure.
accurate.
Sure.
So so yeah, I think that's and you talked about it too, but like no one's going to change the way that they're behaving or get inspired to change the way we're behaving when they
Yeah.
just feel bad about. I mean, they could, but like that's
Yeah.
not the best way to do it. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
So
there's no
when it
question
comes
attached to that. Just a general
So when it
thought.
comes to films like What the Health, I completely appreciate the reason why people feel so compelled to make films like this,
Hmm.
because they want to help. They want to be helpful.
Yeah.
They've found a lifestyle that has shown incredible benefit. Um, and for the majority of people, it is quite beneficial. If you're a person who's so compelled to adopt a healthy dietary pattern within a plant exclusive lifestyle, you're going to do really well. You are. Are you
Hmm.
bulletproof from life? Absolutely not. So let's get that out of the way.
Hmm.
It's not a perfect diet. There isn't one. Okay. We live in a toxic world. We live in a toxic food environment. We live in a toxic soil environment. We live in a toxic air environment. Okay. There's no perfect diet anymore. Okay. But some diets do better than others in the long term. Now, some of the things that I completely understand, I also understand the reason why someone come up to you and say, "Yo, you're part of the problem. You're killing the animals. Don't you see how much damage you're doing the environment and all this stuff?" And I get it. I witness it. I've been on the at the front of slaughterhouses when the trucks with the 6-month-old pigs come in on those. They've been on those trucks for 70 hours in 110-degree weather. Some of them are already dead, and some of them are literally having heart attacks and heat stroke attacks right in front of you. And it's an awful sight. And you don't want it to happen. You don't want it to happen. You want it to stop, and you feel compelled to stop it yourself. But what I think is really important, and my brother is an incredibly influential vegan activist. In fact, he's the organizer for LA Animal Save, which is where those pigs come in on the trucks. He works with people like Joaquin Phoenix. He works with people like Moby. He's a very established photographer, and this is a guy who has spent 1,000+ hours documenting slaughterhouse footage through hidden camera and not hidden camera. He's been given permission to go in and film it sometimes. I love what my brother says. He'll tell you this: if your activism is about yelling at people, then your activism is a catharsis for your anger. And it is about what that person may or may not be doing, rather than having it be solely about the animals. Disruption-based activism is a catharsis for anger. It's fueled by hatred because you hate what's happening so much that you get angry at those that you think are the ones doing it.
Hmm.
Love-based activism is activism that is rooted in caring for the animals. My energy is directed solely at the animals. He does things where they don't go in and yell at people. They go in and they give water to the pigs on these trucks before they're taken into the slaughterhouse to be killed. And people have literally come up to him and they said, do you really think that this is going to change anybody's mind? He goes, I don't know, maybe. But even if it didn't, I'm going to do it because I feel it's the right thing to do. Period. End of story. That's why I do it. If it changes someone's mind, great. If it doesn't, I don't care. I want to be of service to the animals. I'm not here to yell at people. It
Hmm.
doesn't change anyone's mind. So I do understand where people are coming from. I understand the reason why they feel so passionate about wanting it to stop. And so they see someone at a restaurant who ordered a burger and they go, "Oh, you're it. You're the problem. So I got to be angry at you." But it's not a very valuable way to do it. And the
Hmm.
other thing I find to be somewhat problematic about some of these messaging is the belief that meat in any amount and at any time is going to cause disease. It's always going to be the problem. It is equal to a processed food diet. It is terrible. And they say things like meat causes diabetes. Right? This was a
Hmm.
big topic of discussion that came out of the film What the Health. And I'm a fan of What the Health. I know a lot of the people that documented it, but that's also not an accurate statement. It's not an accurate statement. Does the reduction of meat typically improve diabetes outcomes? Yes, but for a very specific reason. And I want to explain to you, if you're okay with it, what is the biochemistry that causes insulin resistance?
As
And
long
then
as
you
you
and I,
dumb it down for me.
yes, yeah, yeah. What is the biochemistry that causes insulin resistance, and why is it that when people do remove meat, do they see insulin sensitivity increase, and why then they think, oh, meat then causes diabetes? Okay.
Hmm.
So if you were to go outside right now and grab a hold of somebody, or don't grab them, just tap them on the shoulder and ask them,
Don't
hey,
grab people.
don't grab people. Say, hey, excuse me. Have you ever heard of insulin resistance? They're likely going to say yes. It's a very big topic right now. It's a very
Yeah.
buzzworthy conversation in the wellness space. And you go, okay, great. What causes it? You're likely going to hear one of, or more than, or maybe all of these three answers. You're going to hear the words sugar, carbs, or insulin. Too much sugar, too much carbs, or too much insulin. That these are what causes insulin resistance. And I can understand why that seems like the correct answer when in fact it's not accurate. So let's talk about what is accurate. When you consume food, fat in food is a triglyceride. And a triglyceride is a glycerol backbone with 1, 2, 3 fatty acids attached to it. Okay? When this is digested, in the digestive process, the glycerol backbone is broken off, and then the fatty acids are free to absorb into the bloodstream. In a diet that is rich in fat and saturated fat, you have a large amount of fatty acids entering the bloodstream. When energy enters the bloodstream, a biological process called the Randle cycle takes place. And the Randle cycle simply describes the competition for energy uptake, meaning the competition for energy to go into cellular tissue. Okay. Carbohydrate and protein energy require insulin in order to be delivered to cellular tissue. Fat energy doesn't. Does insulin deliver fat? Yes, but it doesn't require insulin. There's a particle called this is the most complex term I'm going to use, I promise, a chylomicron particle. These chylomicron particles enter the bloodstream in the presence of fat energy, and they grab a hold of fatty acids and they start distributing them to tissues all over the body. Your tissues get first dibs. Fat energy gets there first. Period. End of story every single time. So let's talk about your muscle cells. In your muscle cells, you have two forms of energy storage. You have carbohydrate energy stored in the form of glycogen, and you have fat energy stored in the form of something called a lipid droplet. And as in the presence of a high-fat diet, and as these chylomicrons deliver these fatty acids into the tissue uncontrolled, remember, they don't have to communicate with the cell. Chylomicrons can deliver fat uncontrolled. This lipid droplet just grows larger and larger and larger and larger and larger over the course of time. Mm-hmm. At a certain point in time, there's now just too much energy inside of the cell. Fat energy lasts a very long time. So for example, let's just describe it this way. Your glycogen is your body's checking account. As soon as carbohydrate energy comes in, it wants to use it immediately. Fat energy is your savings account. It wants to use it only in the event that there's a calorie deficit, or that there's no energy in the environment, so in a fasting state, okay? Mm-hmm. So fat energy can typically last you, a lipid droplet can last you 40 days. A glycogen store can last you 3 hours. That's the difference. So this lipid droplet has grown uncontrolled over the course of time. It's continually being replenished, and now there's too much energy inside of the cell. Now there's a problem. There's no room for new energy uptake. No new energy can get into the cell. So molecules inside of the cell called insulin receptor substrate molecules, or yes, the IRS. The IRS says, hang on a second, we are your cell's accountants, and we are accounting for the energy that's in here, what kind of energy it is, and how is it being used. And we notice there is a problem. We have too much energy in here. We have an energy problem. If we allow more energy in, we're going to start experiencing something called energy poisoning. It's actually a damaging experience to the cells. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk to the outside of the cell where your insulin receptors sit. And we're going to instruct those insulin receptors to reject the action of insulin, because what they're trying to do is prevent any new energy uptake. Insulin is your body's most powerful energy transport hormone, period, end of story. Nothing moves energy more than insulin. So your insulin receptors have been instructed that if insulin comes around, wanting to deliver energy, they need to tell them that they're closed for business and to go somewhere else. Okay. So now this person consumes something rich in carbohydrate energy, like a banana black beans, sweet potato, something really healthy, but rich in carbohydrate energy, glucose enters the bloodstream. The beta cells of your pancreas sense this fluctuation in blood glucose levels. They
Mm-hmm.
release insulin. Insulin grabs a hold of a glucose molecule, walks up to the cell of your muscles, knocks on the door and says, hey, knock, knock, insulin receptors. I've got glucose here. I know it's your preferred energy source. Do you want to take it up and use it as energy? This is when the insulin receptor literally says, hey, listen, man, I know you can't see what's going on in here, so I'm going to give you a little peek. Do you see the size of that lipid droplet? Do you see how much energy is in the cell? You realize we have no room for you. I have been instructed that I have to tell you that we are closed for business. I cannot talk to you, only to say, go somewhere else. And so, in fact, insulin tries for the next 3 hours to deliver this glucose. But insulin resistance is not a site-specific problem. It's a systemic problem. Mm-hmm. So it's meeting the same issue with every cellular tissue, liver cells, kidney cells. So after 3.5 hours, the insulin hormone dies and the glucose is left in the blood. And over the course of time, that glucose level rises higher and higher, and a person is diagnosed with either prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And every time they eat carbohydrate energy, their blood glucose goes to the roof, and they go, oh my gosh, I've got to stop eating all this carbohydrate. That's the problem. The problem isn't why is my blood glucose high? The problem is why can my body no longer tolerate carbohydrate energy? What series of events and mechanisms have led my body to a state where carbohydrate can no longer be metabolized in a healthy and effective manner? The number one cause for this is twofold: too much fat and too much calories. That's it. Mm-hmm. Now, why does it look like when you remove meat from your diet, that you solve this problem? Number one, most meat is actually a little bit high in calories, especially fatty meats. There's between 7 and 1,000 calories per pound. So when people replace the calories coming from meat with, say, beans, they end up losing weight. They end up eating less calories. Number two, meats are also somewhat high in fat, and specifically saturated fat. Beans have 4% fat. Chicken might have 30% fat. So when you replace chicken with beans, you're also reducing your saturated fat intake, which also restores insulin sensitivity by allowing your body to shrink that lipid droplet. So it looks like the solution is the complete removal of meat. It's not the complete removal of meat. It's the reduction of saturated fat.
Got it.
Now that's easily done with a plant exclusive diet, but also easily done in a plant predominant diet. You don't have to not eat meat.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a coincidence. Like meat just happens to have these macronutrients that makes it okay.
And so would a person do better reducing their consumption of meat, especially fatty meats, if they notice that, hey, I got my A1C back, it's elevated, I want to restore it to its proper place of less than 5.7%. Does the replacement of low-fat, protein-rich plants replacing meat do really well in that effort? Yes, it does. But that doesn't mean you have to remove meat entirely. You just have to make specific, accurate, and appropriate adjustments. That's all.
Okay. So, excuse me. So I want to get back to what happens. Okay. So your insulin resistance is high. Yeah. Your cells, there's no room in your cells for more energy. Mm-hmm. What happens to that excess energy?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So in an insulin resistant state, there's going to be two methods in which you're going to try to reverse this situation. And the common one is you're going to go to the doctor. They're going to diagnose you with type 2 diabetes, maybe prediabetes.
What does your body naturally do? Or are you answering that?
I'm answering that, yeah.
Oh, you are? Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, listen, I want you to eat this banana in front of me and let's check your blood glucose over the next 2 hours. And you do that. And in an insulin resistant state, your blood glucose is going to go very, very high. It is. That's what's going to happen because your blood glucose levels are like a smoke signal saying, hey, there's a problem inside of our cells. And then after that, after 2 hours, when your blood glucose comes back down, they're going to give you a piece of chicken. They're going to say, eat this. Your blood glucose isn't going to move. It's not. There's very little carbohydrate in meat. If any at all, there might be small amounts stored in the tissue, but very small amounts. And they go, that's your solution. I just showed you the carbohydrate energy is causing the problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called the carbohydrate avoidance game. This is a low carbohydrate dietary pattern. And what's going to happen when this person does this is actually their blood glucose is going to come down and their A1C is going to come down. It's going to look like they've solved the problem. But what happens when you remove the calories coming from carbohydrate energy and you need to add calories back to get the number of calories you need in order to sustain, your diet? You have to now get them from calories coming from either protein and fat or just fat, right? Because unless you're doing just adding egg whites, it's going to be very hard for you to get it from just protein. So it's going to be either protein and fat or just fat if you eat like nuts and seeds and stuff, which are smaller in protein, but mostly fat. So by reducing your carbohydrate, now increasing the fat beyond what you were doing before, you're keeping those lipid droplet stores very, very rich, very saturated. And you're going to notice that you can't tolerate carbohydrate energy only in the event that you ever eat something rich in carbohydrate energy. You're going to bite into a banana, your blood glucose is going to go through the roof. You go, wow, man, that's just proof right there. I just showed myself again. Carbohydrate energy is a problem. I can never eat carbs again. This is the common situation that you see play out. People avoid carbohydrate, and by doing so, by not having glucose entering their blood, they lower their blood glucose levels, they lower their A1C, but they're not restoring insulin action. They're not restoring insulin sensitivity. So what is the most effective way to do that? The most effective way to do that is actually to reduce your total fat consumption to less than 25% of your calories per day coming from fat from all foods combined. When you do this, and in a slight calorie deficit, because most people who are insulin resistant are going to be slightly overweight as well. When you do this, you have very little fatty acids entering your cellular tissue. Those cells are closed off to insulin action. Remember, they're still shut off. You're still insulin resistant. So the only energy in that cell that the body can use is the large lipid droplet. So the mitochondria, which are the energy burning factories of the cell, they start shrinking that lipid droplet because now they're burning more of it than is being replenished. And this lipid droplet is shrinking and shrinking over the course of time until you get to a point to where you're actually going to run out of energy. If those IRS molecules don't turn back on the insulin receptors and restore insulin action to bring in new energy, you're going to run out of energy. They're not going to let that happen. So at a certain point in time, your insulin receptors come back on, and now carbohydrate energy can get back into the cell and replenish that glycogen store. So what this shows is what we're trying to do is not simply achieve a low A1C. Yes, achieving a low A1C is an interesting thing to do, but you have to show that you can not only achieve a low A1C.
What is an A1C, by the way?
Yeah, great.
I don't
great
think
question.
you said that.
So an A1C is a biomarker that we use to determine someone's insulin resistant state, whether they're diabetic or pre-diabetic. It's usually expressed in percentages. And what it is essentially letting us know what the average blood glucose of that individual has been over a 3 to 4 month period. And so I'll actually explain to you why it's in percentages. So take a deep breath for me. Go ahead. What's happening right now is oxygen molecules are attaching themselves to hemoglobin molecules, and your hemoglobin molecules are delivering oxygen to tissue all over the body. It's a very valuable thing. Your hemoglobin is also a transport molecule for certain nutrients like oxygen. The reason why A1C is written in percentages is, let's say, healthy A1C is anything less than 5.6, pre-diabetic is 5.7 to 6.4, and type 2 diabetic is above 6.4%. The reason why it's written in percentages is because that is the number of hemoglobin molecules out of 100. Hemoglobin molecules out of 100 that now has glucose attached to it. So if your A1C is 7%, 7 out of every 100 hemoglobin molecules now has glucose attached to it all the time. That is a problem. That is a problem because you have displaced the opportunity for hemoglobin molecules to deliver valuable things to other tissues, and this can be a disease-inducing process over the course of time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in order to show that someone has achieved insulin sensitivity, they not only have to achieve an A1C less than 5.7%, they have to do so while showing that their body can tolerate carbohydrate energy. The easiest way to do that is take something called a glucose tolerance test, where you consume about 75 grams of carbohydrate, usually in liquid form, and then you monitor your blood glucose over the course of 2 hours. And if it goes above 180, you typically fail.
Yeah.
But a person who's insulin sensitive should be able to eat as much carbohydrate as they want while achieving an A1C less than 5.7%. It isn't simply the reduction of A1C. It's the restoration of glucose tolerance. That's insulin sensitivity.
Got it. Okay, so this is something that, my wife had to do, and this is probably something that if your wife or if you are a woman and you get pregnant, this is something that pregnant women have to do because it's very common, but when they're pregnant for whatever reason.
Yeah, gestational diabetes.
Yes. And there's an incredibly high percentage of women who are normally healthy who get gestational diabetes. And so they do this test. Anyway, that's where my relatability to this comes through right now, because I remember my wife doing these tests recently.
The
So,
best work on insulin sensitivity ever written is a book called Mastering Diabetes. It's a New York Times bestseller. It is the best understanding of insulin sensitivity that's ever been written. Not simply the best, like, because a lot of people are like, I just want to lower my glucose. Well,
mhm,
I mean, if you just never ate, you'd lower your glucose, but that's not a valuable thing to do in the long term.
right.
How do we effectively restore your body's ability to do what is designed to do, which is tolerate carbohydrate energy, utilize it effectively, and not have an issue as a result of it? Like, nobody becomes insulin resistant because they're eating carbohydrate. That's just a
Mhm,
biological fact. Carbohydrate energy is not the cause of insulin resistance.
mhm,
Cause of insulin resistance is the excess accumulation of fatty acid energy inside of tissues that are not designed to store large quantities of fatty acids. That's what it
mm,
is. And so, does the removal of meat aid in restoring insulin sensitivity? Yes. But does that mean that meat causes insulin resistance? Technically, no.
mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a very long answer to my question. And now I know. Now I know more about insulin resistance. So I'm going to summarize this because, like, a lot of times when I'm like, if I were to read this in a book,
Yeah.
I might actually fall asleep.
Yeah.
It's just how
Yeah.
I'm not like a science oriented person. So like, I
Yeah.
think I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who is like, I'm really good at reading history. Like
Yeah.
I can read behavioral psychology, but like when you put numbers in front of me, I'm like,
Sure. Sure. Sure.
like my brain just turns off. So kind of summary here is if you have a diet that has too much fat and you do
Mhm.
that over time, what
Yes.
happens is your insulin receptors become more resistant. They prevent the intake of glycogen sources, which your body
Yes.
prefers because it's filled with lipids instead, which come
That's
from
right.
fatty acids, which come from fatty foods.
That's right.
And as a result of that, that's where I'm stuck right now. So as a result of that, what's happening in the body? You answered it,
Yes.
but like you answered it in
Yeah.
a way where I couldn't.
So typically what happens is those fat stores inside of your cell, there's something called intramyocellular and intrahepatocellular lipids. So
Okay.
intramyocellular lipid stands for intra, inside, myo,
Hmm.
muscle, cellular, and lipid, fat. So fat in muscle cells.
Hmm.
And hepato is just liver. So intrahepatocellular lipids, fat in liver cells. What happens is at a point those become optimally saturated. Like, you're not going to saturate them beyond that point, and you're just going to start accumulating more adipose tissue, right? Which
Okay.
is just body fat, which is
Okay.
also a factor in causing insulin resistance. The more adipose tissue you have, the more insulin resistant you are as well. And so
Okay.
typically what happens is a person is going to achieve a significant degree of insulin resistance. Their A1C might be getting up to as high as, I mean, mine was a 12. I've seen as high as 16, but I haven't really seen higher than that. I know there are cases of it, but
Okay.
typically what's going to happen is you're going to start to demonstrate incredibly unhealthy outcomes. You're going to start
Hmm.
to demonstrate advanced type 2 diabetes. You're going to start to demonstrate advanced cardiovascular disease, like super high cholesterol levels. You're going to start
Okay.
to demonstrate high blood pressure levels, and you're going to start to
So it gets
demonstrate
so it's getting stored as fat. So this is
getting
all
stored as fat. And so
getting
you're going
stored
to
as
see
fat. So
fatty
that's what's
liver
happening to me.
occur. You're going to see chronic kidney disease occur. You're going to
Hmm.
start to see atherosclerosis occur. And it's just going to increase in those outcomes over time.
So if you were to, let's say, like, can this happen also if you're like, what if you're just eating carbs? What
Yeah.
if you're eating like a bunch of carbs instead of a bunch of fatty foods? Does
Yeah.
does
So
the same thing happen, or that's different?
only in the event of calorie excess. So only if this person is gaining weight as a result of that, and you have carbohydrate energy being converted to fat through de novo lipogenesis, are you actually going to see the storage of fat energy that's been converted from carbohydrate energy. Carbohydrate
So if
energy,
they have
remember.
the so if they have the same amount of calories,
Mhm.
but they're having more fats than carbohydrates, are they going to develop more insulin resistance than somebody who is having more carbs or more
they're going
calories
to
from carbs?
they're going to develop it faster.
Okay,
Yeah, much more
got it.
effectively. A
Okay.
person who's eating in calorie excess is always going to end up gaining weight, and weight
Hmm.
gain independent of other variables is going to cause insulin resistance. But the rate in which that occurs for someone who's gaining weight as a result of the majority of their calories coming from fat, the disease process of insulin resistance is going to occur faster.
Hmm. Okay. All right. I get it.
Yep.
I think.
Cool.
Now I'm gonna go do a solo podcast on that, 45 minutes explaining insulin resistance, and yeah, that'll be terrible. I will not do that. All right, well, I want to keep asking questions about
Yes, let's go.
vegan diet stuff. So something that we see a lot of is there are certain athletes who have vegan
Mhm.
diets, right? And
Yeah,
I think these are just the big, more popular interest
sure.
stories, right? They're like, oh, let's say I'm just going to bring out the name that I remember, but like Cam Newton, right,
Mhm.
adopted a vegan diet,
Yeah.
and one of the things they say is like meat slows you down. Like I notice that I'm just have high energy levels all the time. Does meat slow you
Mhm.
down?
So not inherently, but like what I would say is if a person is eating a very high meat diet,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to experience inflammatory levels. They're going to probably experience some insulin resistance
Mm-hmm.
that's going to have a sluggish feeling for them.
Okay.
And so when someone says, "Oh, I adopted a plant exclusive diet and I just feel lighter," that is a common experience.
Mm.
A plant exclusive diet, when done well, is highly inflammatory. I mean, anti-inflammatory. It's very anti-inflammatory. It
Mm-hmm.
actually increases muscle recovery. There's been phenomenal research on this as well. And actually, like I said, it optimizes insulin sensitivity. So your ability to uptake energy and output energy is optimized, which can feel really good for an athlete.
Mm.
Now, depending on how much meat a person has in their diet, you might feel exactly the same when you go plant based. You
Mm-hmm.
might be like, oh, I don't notice any difference at all. Like I was eating meat, but I wasn't eating like, I wasn't a carnivore.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really notice any difference, and that may be true. But what's really important to consider is not just how much meat are you eating, because yes, dosage makes the poison. Like we're not going to say all meat in any amount and at any time is going to create the same detrimental effect over time.
Mm-hmm.
But what's your source of meat? How much are you eating it? And how often are you doing it? So a person who makes a transition from eating, they're eating red meat every day, but they're not having, they're having like a, you know, uh, bacon in the morning, or then they have like a burger at night.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, but I have a lot of vegetables all the time. I have a lot of vegetables with that. So like, what's the problem? What's the problem?
Mm.
There was a really interesting study that came out. It was a burden of proof study on unprocessed red meat consumption. And this actually got really popularized because one of the conclusions that they came out with was that they couldn't say that one of the big reportings on this, not what the study found, but one of the big reportings on this was that we just showed that red meat, unprocessed red meat, doesn't cause heart disease, doesn't cause colorectal cancer. You may have seen this reporting. And
Mm.
so what happened was they looked at unprocessed red meat consumption. And as long as your consumption of unprocessed red meat was less than 100 grams per day on average, disease process risks didn't increase.
Mm.
So then everyone goes, there you go. When looking at this one aspect of the data set, we can now say red meat is not causal in this. The issue is as red meat consumption crosses that barrier, as it went above 100 grams per day on average, risk across the board started to increase. And
Mm.
so that's valuable. So
And
if you're
this is
saying, hey,
regardless of whether or not it's like
whether
level
it's
one or if it's like grass fed.
that has no impact on it whatsoever.
Mm.
So that's really important to recognize, just in terms of like, okay, if I am going to include red meat in my diet, what's an appropriate amount for me to include it where I don't increase these risk factors?
Mm.
Having increased risk factor doesn't mean you're going to get it. No, you might not. But how much risk are you willing to take on your
Mm.
health over time? And so that's really, really valuable.
So my question there is like I eat a lot of red meat.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I eat 100 grams. There might be some days where I have more than 100 grams a day,
Hmm.
but I think in general I don't. I also like to say that like I have like a 60 to 80% vegan diet because
There you
like
go.
I eat a
Then you're
ton of
actually probably doing
I
really,
eat a
really
ton of
well.
vegetables. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I have I talk about this a lot, but I love my morning smoothie.
Yeah.
I fill an entire Vitamix with
Yep.
ingredients, with fruits, with spinach, with
Yeah.
some flaxseed, some chia seeds, a bunch of like superfoods like that, ton of berries, like 3 cups of
Yeah.
berries. Um, and so a ton of my caloric consumption from the day comes from this smoothie and comes from other plants, other fruits. Um, but I'm asking about the meat thing because I'm curious, like, is this something that you can measure in your blood levels like
Yes.
over a period of time, or is it just something that you hit 65 and you're like, oh shit, I fucked up, I'm done?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So when we talk about risk, right, this is population risk, right? So
Hmm.
for the average person, when they look at risk factors, they're going to go, well, does that mean I'm going to get those diseases? No, it just
Hmm.
means your risk of getting it is increased. Will you get it? Maybe, maybe not. That depends on factors, but the risk is always going to be same to the person. So when we look at that, what we're going to say is, if I'm choosing to include these foods, am I including the amount that I know increases risk, or are there valuable substitutions I can make for foods that don't have the same risk factor involved? So
Hmm.
actually, the replacement of that red meat with foods like fish would actually be a very valuable substitution for you to make if you didn't want to replace it with plants. Is
Hmm.
the replacement of that red meat with plant calories always going to reduce your risk of those? Yes, as long as the replacement comes from whole intact plants, not things like Beyond Burgers and
Hmm.
Impossible Burgers. If the calories from your red meat were to be replaced with protein rich plant foods like tempeh, black beans, or lentils, you're
Hmm.
going to reduce your disease risk every single time. That
Oh,
is going to happen.
okay.
Now, again, if you're confident that your consumption of meat is about, between 10 to 20% of your calories per day, and the presence of red meat in your diet is less than 100 grams per day on average, you're probably going to do really, really well. And I
Hmm.
think that's value. Like, I'm a vegan, and I would love it if people didn't eat meat, but I'm also not going to lie.
Hmm.
I'm not going to lie and tell you that if you eat meat, you're doomed. That's just not an accurate statement.
Hmm. So it's just moderating that. Is there any difference between like, I think I think one other comparison is, we talked about this, but the standard American diet, SAD versus vegan,
Yes.
and then saying like, you put all these pictures of, there's pictures of this, right? You show like a picture of like plants on one side, and you show like a picture of all of these like really
Of, like,
crappy quality
McDonald's.
meat,
Yeah, exactly.
McDonald's, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
is there like a significant difference between, like a grass-fed pasture raised, pound of ground beef versus, like this
Yeah, of
was
course. Of course there
okay.
is. Of course there is. But however, what is really important to recognize is that when we're looking at foods that we know have inherent risk as percentage of consumption,
Hmm.
or percentage of presence in your diet increases, it's really important to be mindful of it. Does the sourcing of that and does the quality of that matter? Yes, the sourcing and quality
Hmm.
of all foods matters. It doesn't matter if it's red meat, it doesn't matter if it's beans. The sourcing and quality is always
Yeah.
going to be a valuable factor to pay attention to. But the thing is to recognize that certain foods come with certain inherent risks,
Hmm.
and those inherent risks apply at a certain point in time. A certain dosage will make that food either safe or insulting to health outcomes over time. So
Hmm.
recognizing those risk factors, understanding at what point those risks might increase and at what point they decrease, is going to be important for individuals who choose to continue to include those foods in their diet.
Hmm.
That's all.
Okay. So I have two questions that I can think of. The first
Yeah.
is, I have a friend who, um, was originally really into yoga, body weight, gymnastics training. Then he got into lifting. He got huge. And he also decided at this time that he wanted to be vegan to
Yeah.
show that you could do this. And he ended up getting some stomach problems
Yeah.
from, I think he said he was just having way too much volume. I think he was having too much rice or too much beans, and his stomach just couldn't
Mm.
handle it. And then he started doing, I think he said like, yeah, and then I added like a pound of ground beef to my diet per day, and now everything's great. And
Yeah.
so like with him, my question is, and I think this is a couple questions there, is do you have to slowly transition to a vegan diet in order for it to be effective? And also, do you think with his case that it was just he wasn't having the right protein rich diet
So what I
foods
think what I
in
think
his
happened
vegan
is
diet? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So what I think happened is you mentioned two foods that are very fiber rich. Beans
Hmm.
are some of the most fiber rich foods on the planet. Now your gut is like a muscle, right? So your gut contains bacterial microbes that break down fiber.
Hmm.
Now the specific bacteria that break down plant fiber, the populations of those will shrink in the absence of those foods in your diet. So now you have a population of bacteria that was once pretty populated. It was pretty populated in your what's called your microbiome. And as a removal of those foods over time, those bacterial populations shrink. And then this person decides, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 100% plant exclusive. I'm going to eat huge amounts of beans and rice, which is an
Mm,
incredible amount of fiber. And I'm going to just start eating it tomorrow. What happened is
mm,
that person put those fibers, very huge amounts, like significant, especially if he's a powerlifter. I'm assuming this guy's eating like 3,500 calories. So it is not outrageous to assume he was eating upwards of 100 to 120 grams of fiber when before he may have been eating 40.
mm,
So these fiber hit his gut, and the bacterial population required to break it down was just not populated enough to do it effectively. And he got
mm,
problems like GI distress, bloating, gas,
mhm,
GI pain as a result of it. And so what he did was he goes, oh, I just feel terrible. Then he removed those fruits from his diet. And as a result of the removal, or what we would call elimination, of the foods that were causing the symptom went away. And he goes, that's it. There you go. I can't do that. No, what happened was it was the equivalent of a person who had started working out when they were younger,
mhm,
then just didn't for 20 years, and then went back to the gym and tried to bench press what they
mm,
did before, which might have been 200 pounds, and they got injured or they got really sore and they go, oh my God, this feels terrible. I
okay.
just must not be made to lift weights. No, this person would have done much better if they had been slowly and incrementally adjusting their dietary pattern from one that included a lot of meat
Mhm,
to one that included more calories coming from plants in a slow fashion so that the bacteria had time to repopulate.
mhm. Okay. Next question.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about hair loss or like lower testosterone levels with
Yeah.
switching to a vegan diet. I'm
Mhm.
assuming that's not because the vegan diet is wrong. I'm assuming it's because they're doing it wrong. So what's happening
Yeah.
there? What are they not? What are they missing?
So, number one, there could be a lot of things going on when a person experiences hair loss, um, uh, low testosterone. The interesting thing is that when you look at plant-based populations of people that eat either plant predominant, because there's not actually a lot of populations that consume a plant exclusive diet. In fact, globally, I don't know
Mm-hmm,
if there actually are any cultures that do it.
mm-hmm,
But when you look at the populations around the world that have a plant predominant lifestyle, their testosterone levels are typically exceedingly high. They're very, very high. Um, and so if a person is adopting a dietary lifestyle where their testosterone plummets and they say, I tried a vegan diet and my testosterone went down, by saying they ate a vegan diet, all I know is what they're not eating. I don't know
mm-hmm.
what they're actually eating, which is the
Okay.
biggest problem I have with people saying, I want to do a vegan diet. I'm like, you've got to tell me what that means to you.
Mm,
Because a vegan diet just tells me you're not eating animal products. I don't know if you're eating Doritos, like Cheetos or not Cheetos, but like Fritos and all these other things, Oreos and bagels and all this stuff that really is completely has no nutritional integrity. Or if
mm-hmm,
you're actually switching to what would be considered a plant-based whole food diet, which is a very nutritionally has high amounts of nutritional integrity, lots of value, and would likely
mm-hmm,
increase those outcomes. So it's hard for me to say what happened to those individual cases.
mm-hmm.
But if they said I tried a vegan diet, likely what happened was their dietary pattern was insufficient to meet their needs.
Mm. Okay. All right. Next question. Common supplementation needs for vegan diets,
Yeah.
because I think this is where a lot of people mess up. And
Yes,
I've also
they do.
heard, when I do talk with, I haven't had too many conversations I haven't had too many conversations about specific diets, like talking about like, what do you eat on a daily basis? What are your
Yeah.
supplementation with vegans? But when I have had those conversations, there have been conversations like, oh, I also need to like, yeah, I'm doing this. There are some supplements that I do need to take, and these are those supplements. So like, what are those
Yeah.
supplements that like you need to be aware of that would be very helpful for a vegan diet?
Yeah. So the supplements that I'm going to list would actually be pretty beneficial for the majority of people.
Okay.
The three that come to mind, obviously, first off the bat is B12.
B12.
Okay.
Even I
So
knew that.
yeah. So here's the thing about B12. This is a really cool thing about B12. People think B12 comes from animals. It doesn't. B12, vitamin B12, originates from microorganisms in the soil. And then when consumed, your body converts that microorganism into a B12 vitamin.
Okay.
So since we live in a toxic food environment, we live in a toxic soil environment. When
Hmm.
food is sold at the grocery stores, that produce has to be triple washed before it's put out onto the produce. on the stand. So what they've done is they've effectively washed that bacterial microorganisms off of the food. And so by consuming just the plants, you're not going to get enough of it for your body to make its own. Interestingly, because of that same issue, because of soil depletion, because of the lack of biodiversity in the soil, most produce alone has a deficiency in these microorganisms.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for the animal livestock to get enough B12, they have to inject animals with B12 supplementation. So the funny thing is people who eat meat who don't supplement with B12, you actually are supplementing with B12. You just ate the supplement that animal was given.
Hmm.
And so B12 supplementation is valuable for anybody. The majority of people in Western cultures are B12 deficient, regardless of their dietary pattern. So if you're curious, go get your B12 levels checked. You can supplement with B12, typically between about like 3,000 micrograms of B12 per week is enough to supplement your lifestyle. The second one is D3. So D3 is another vitamin that doesn't come from food. It actually comes from sun exposure. And so we absorb D3 from the sun. Now, we all know that, of course, the world is not what it was, 10, 20, 30, 100,000 years ago. And so sun exposure is not as safe as it used to be. And so most people also live a lot of their time indoors. So even when we are outside in the sun, it's not enough to provide us with the D3 that we need in order to be optimally healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Most Americans and people in Western cultures are D3 deficient, regardless of their dietary pattern. So supplementing with D3 is really valuable. I do that every single day. Here's one that's a big one: omega-3. Omega-3 supplementation amongst plant-exclusive eaters is going to be a little bit more important than those who are not plant-exclusive. I recommend it for everybody, but especially for those who are on a plant-exclusive diet. And the reason for this is simple. Your brain converts ALA, or your body converts ALA to DHA and EPA, which are the omega-3s that you're beneficial for, like cognitive longevity, has cardioprotective benefits. There is about 20%, I believe this number is correct, I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, that's fine, of people who simply have an incredibly difficult time converting ALA to DHA and EPA. So the easiest way to not ever have to worry about this problem is just take a DHA and EPA supplement every single day and don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You can
So
get
that's like a fish oil supplement. I take those.
It's a fish oil supplement, or you can get converted DHA and EPA that comes from algae, which is the source where the fish get it from. And you can they convert it to DHA and EPA, and you can get a vegan DHA and EPA supplement. So if you're a person who doesn't want to eat fish or have anything to do with that, you can get it, and it's important. Just get it. There's two other supplements that are really, really valuable that I take every single day. Number one is K2. So K2 is an important supplement that increases calcium absorption into your bones. Now, calcium deficiency is not something that you're going to easily find on a plant-rich diet. The main source of calcium is plants, is the origin of it. Calcium is a mineral that's found in the ground. So in leafy greens and root vegetables, it's going to be very rich in calcium. So you're going to get more than you need.
Does drinking milk help calcium? I have to ask because like we're here and you're here and I'm just going to ask.
This is a great question. Does drinking milk help calcium? Well, drinking milk has calcium.
Yeah.
So if that's your only source of calcium, then it helps. But it's not like a benefit inherently that like if you don't, you're going to be deficient in it. And I want to talk something else. Osteoporosis is not calcium deficiency. That's not what it is. Osteoporosis is bone atrophy. So bone atrophy is a result of a culture that sits too much. We have a culture that wakes up in the morning and goes to the kitchen table to sit, to go get in your car and sit so we can drive to the office and sit, so we can go to lunch and sit, and then drive home and sit at dinner, and then sit in the living room and watch TV, and then go to bed, and then repeat that process. Very few people are moving their bodies. Your bones are living organisms that respond to stress in the same way that your muscles respond to stress. When there's a stimulus, a challenge that is applied to the skeletal frame, either through walking, you have impact, or you're putting weight on your frame, you're doing squats, you're challenging your skeletal frame to defend itself against this challenge. And it defends itself by intaking calcium and creating denser bones. That's what fights osteoporosis, is using your skeletal frame. Now, in order to optimize calcium absorption, K2 vitamins are incredibly valuable because unabsorbed calcium can find itself in your arteries. So the calcification of cholesterol plaques and stuff is a result of excess unabsorbed calcium. There's some research to support that, but supplementing with K2 is a very valuable thing to do. And
Okay.
K2 is also kind of hard to get on a plant exclusive diet. You can get it from some like things like there's a really gross food that is rich in K2 that I don't even want to touch. So just supplement with K2 and you're good. And the other one I take is creatine.
Hmm.
Creatine is one of the safest supplements ever studied. Now there's actually some research showing some cognitive benefit to creatine supplementation, but I use it for the reason everyone else does who uses it, which is a performance supplementation.
Yeah. I took creatine back in high school because I thought it was really important.
Yeah,
Um,
it does work. It is valuable,
okay.
um, and and for those who are athletes, if like I said, it's one of the safest supplements ever studied. And now the new studies on cognitive benefit in creatine supplementation is pretty interesting. Reduction
Mm, that's pretty cool.
in it has a cognitive protective benefit.
Okay. All right. Now I have my last question, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Who knows? Organic versus inorganic
Yeah.
produce.
This is
Because
such
I've
a
seen there's so much
yeah
I see
a
so much
heated
stuff on
topic.
social media right now, and like there's some people who go to the one end of the extreme and they're like, if you eat any plant that is not organic, like you
Yeah.
are stuffing yourself with poison. I'm like, I don't think that's true.
It's not true.
So yeah.
So certain foods are dirtier, quote unquote, dirtier than others. And there's always a
Hmm.
list that's put out called the Dirty Dozen, which is like the produce that is most sprayed with pesticides. And if you're an individual who just really wants to avoid those foods, you can buy those organic. And typically it's kind of thin skinned fruits and things like corn is a highly pesticide ridden food.
Hmm.
Berries, because of how thin the skin is going to get into the food. And so a lot of those are on the Dirty Dozen. But here's the thing:
Hmm.
when we talk about things like pesticides, or when we talk about conventionally raised produce versus organic raised produce, and is there risk, we have to look at studies that look at health outcomes over the course of time, right? So we want to look at populations of people who consume those foods, and what do we see as a result of that consumption over time? Do we see any statistically significant increases in chronic disease outcomes? Now, the data on this does not show that there is any significant or statistically significant increased risk in the consumption of conventionally raised produce versus organic produce. However, I'm not a moron, and I'm not going to say there isn't risk in poison, okay?
Hmm.
I have a personal belief that when I can buy organic, I want to buy organic for two reasons. One, while the data may not show it yet, I fully recognize that research is an ever evolving and ever changing medium, meaning that
Hmm.
there may be data that comes out in a little bit that says, hey, guess what? We did a new study in a different method and we actually found risk. So if you can buy organic, do for two reasons. One, let's avoid that risk that may not have been discovered yet. If you
Hmm.
can't do it right now, there is no data to suggest that you should be concerned. Number two, if you can, let's support organic farmers.
Mm.
Let's support people who want to care for the soil, who want to care for the air, and who want to care for the animals and plants that surround them. That is an
Yeah.
intention of mine. That is why organic produce purchasing is important to me.
Hmm. So I've also heard that organic versus inorganic pesticides or whatever is used, that organic, I don't know, I don't even know if I'm describing this right, but I've heard that organic is just a certain category of pesticides and that they're not necessarily less harmful than pesticides that would be considered not organic. And
Yeah,
I'm probably asking that question incorrectly, but I'm hoping that you
no,
can provide me
yeah,
with the
I,
information that I'm looking for
I,
here.
I wish I knew the answer to that, because there's different, from what I understand, there's different gradings of organic, right? And then you have like the whole non-GMO versus organic, and
Hmm.
organic, non-GMO isn't technically, doesn't have to be organic, but organic has to be non-GMO, and all these other categories and subcategories and stuff. And it's very confusing.
Yes.
I don't know what the answer is on that question. However, my thing is this: all you can do is the best you can,
Hmm.
and you can do the best you can with what you have. So if you're going in and you're like, I want to eat more plants because from what I understand is the increased consumption of whole intact plants benefits human health outcomes. and the plants that you love to eat that will allow you to make changes that will benefit your health, some of them are conventional and some of them are organic, make the choice that's available to you and advocate for change in your stores. Say, hey, I really love buying this food, this produce, but yeah, I see that you don't have any organic. If you did, I'd buy it.
Mm,
Please let's change that. Be advocates and say, I want to give you my money and I want to support that change with financial incentive. I want to pay for the change that I want to see in the world. I'm here telling you, as a customer, as a consumer, that's what I want to see. That's the
mm,
thing that everybody has the ability to do. And if you don't find it there, go check out your local farmers markets.
mm,
Support local farmers who are trying to do really well, who are trying to bring products that we just don't see at the conventional grocery stores, or in qualities that we no longer see in grocery stores. So maybe if you have to travel 5 miles more in order to do that, perhaps it might be worth exploring it and see if it meets your value system.
mm. Okay. All right. I'll have to text my grandparents. They own a grocery store.
There
Make
you
sure
go.
they're, make sure they're getting as many organic sources as they can. All right. I did think of one last question here,
Okay.
and I think as you were describing the slaughterhouse,
Yeah.
that really did make me think like, oh, that is something that I definitely overlook in my own personal meat consumption. And everyone has to, if you're, or you
Yeah.
acknowledge it, and there's also some pretty I follow a pretty cool account. I forgot what it's called, but they they're very open about how they process their foods, and their
Yeah.
process their which is another way of how they how they kill and get their produce ready. And they're very you know it's a small farm, but they go
Mhm.
through this whole explanation of how they use the resources, and how they're like, this was our cow and we love this cow, and this is
Yeah.
and now we're and so I think that it's really cool to see that in like a different way. I guess I'm saying that just to say, like, I am considering these different
Yeah.
outcomes. um, but that leads me into this question, to ask: is it true that somebody who is eating meat is consuming more overall resources than somebody who is consuming all plants?
Yes.
Or is this
So
is this like not a is this like
no,
a conversation that
the
shouldn't
data
even be had?
the data on this is actually really good. There's
Okay.
a researcher, I believe his name is Nicholas Carter. I think he's the world's leading authority on this. And so when you think about resources in order to produce a calorie of uh, animal product, it's about
Hmm.
100 to 1. So you need about 100 calories of and 100 calories in for every 1 calorie that you get out. And so the largest use of available land on the planet is animal agriculture. Actually, the majority of usable land on the planet is used for animal agriculture.
Hmm.
The majority of calories grown, 80% of calories grown on the planet, are grown specifically to feed animal livestock in order to feed people.
Hmm.
Okay, we have a population of 8 billion humans, and we raise and feed and support 100 billion land animals every year for human consumption. So when people say, oh, the reason why we have a food shortage is because we have a population problem, no, we don't have a population problem. We have a human food population problem.
Hmm.
The majority of calories consumed on the planet are calories fed to animals that we later eat, so we lose, 100 to 1 on that.
Yeah.
The largest use of fresh water is for animal agriculture.
Hmm.
The largest contributor to rainforest deforestation is the deforestation of rainforests specifically to create opportunity to grow crops that are fed to animals. So if you're saying, hey, I want to reduce, like people always say, well, the largest factor in the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest is for soy. Yes, but all of that soy is grown specifically to feed animals. It's 87%
Hmm.
of or 80% of all soy products grown are for animal consumption. Another 13% of that is for products like plastics. Only about 7% of the soy grown on the planet is for human consumption. So we have a huge issue when it comes to resource intensive nature
Hmm.
of raising animals on this planet. Now, what would be beneficial? Do I think we need another 1,000 perfect vegans? Absolutely not. We need 100 million people making intentional changes to their dietary pattern to reduce the consumption of animal products. If we
Hmm.
displaced half of that energy, right? If we displaced half of that land and restored it to either growing calories for humans or allowing forests to come back, that would make a massive difference. This is not an all or nothing game.
Mm-hmm.
But my brother always says, the world doesn't need you to do everything, but the world needs everything you can do.
Mm.
And if you can just make some significant change to your dietary pattern and just consider, hey, look, I know that there's no inherent risk. There's no inherent risk in me replacing certain calories coming from animal products with calories coming from plant products like beans and grains and soy products. Unless you have a soy allergy or individual is soy sensitive, then you would avoid those. There's no inherent risk here. I want to try it. I want to see how I feel. I want to be contributing to change in environmental impact, and I want to see how I feel. And when it comes to the way that animals are slaughtered, my answer is this: I get it. I appreciate people who are trying to find a more quote unquote humane way to do that. But for me personally, I don't know a humane way to take the life of something that doesn't want to die.
Mm.
That's me.
Yeah.
And so for me, in order to align with my own moral compass, my actions have to look like avoiding that choice every single time.
Mm. Okay. All right. That was cool because
Yeah.
I noticed like this progression of like factual to like
Yeah.
still factual, but now like more and more passionate, and it's like it
Yes.
crescendoed over the course
Oh,
of
it
the
got great on
interview.
this. The second half of the
Yeah,
conversation was like truly phenomenal.
yeah, that was cool. So now I'm thinking, and if you were listening to this and you're like, this is like, these are some really good points here. Now I'm thinking like, how can I, I'm not saying I'm going to be giving up meat anytime soon, but in an effort to, to help the world, I think me starting to understand how can I integrate some of these, how can I integrate more of a vegan diet into my lifestyle? So understanding, what are some dinners that I can make that don't have meat, or what are some,
It's a great
what are some
question.
typical meals that I can eat where I, like, I have eggs every day, for example. Like,
Yeah.
what can I have instead? So, like, you mentioned Game Changers as a website. What are some other
Yeah.
resources that people
My
can,
my
go
three
to?
favorite websites for recipes are plantstrong.com,
Okay,
forksoverknives.com.
cool.
Great. Those are two fantastic websites for this. And then for those who are athletes who are going to be a little bit more protein focused, Game Changers has recipes. So gamechangers.com has recipes as well.
Okay. Is Game Changers, is that Arnold Schwarzenegger, or is that like a,
It is.
it
Yeah.
is. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Cool. I do want to. Well, I don't know if I want to. I don't need to. I don't need to say what I'm was about to say. I think I've seen some conversations with people where they interview strongmen or they interview athletes, and they. You know what? We're just going to cut this part because I don't think we need to talk anymore.
Okay.
What am I at? 130, 137, 32. Cut this. Note 137, 137, 22. Cut this part. Okay, those are awesome resources. I'm gonna have to take a look at those, and because I have no idea how to integrate like tempeh into my diet, or like
Yeah.
things like
Yeah. And
that.
tempeh is one of my favorite foods. So the number one way I consume tempeh is I make my favorite burrito bowl, right? So chopped romaine lettuce, rice, beans topped with tempeh,
Hmm.
some cumin, some onion powder, some garlic powder, some cayenne pepper, a little bit of hot sauce, a little bit of salsa, cashew
Hmm.
queso on top, and go to town.
Okay, and then and to my understanding, so like if I'm subbing those kinds of things for meat, does
Mhm.
that give me what changes happen in terms of, do I have a little bit more leeway to add in more carbohydrates? Do I have, or kind of what's
So
happening there?
yeah, so what's likely going to happen is if you were to say, all right, every night, 3 days a week, I have steak, right?
Okay.
And I want to switch that to grilled tofu or grilled tempeh. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to have a little bit of a reduction calorie for calorie and percentage of calories coming from protein, a little bit more coming from carbohydrate. And
Hmm.
so, likely, because of the rest of your dietary pattern, you're still going to meet your protein needs pretty easily because actually tempeh is a pretty high protein food. And so, just you don't have to worry about whether it adds more carbohydrates to your macro split or not. Just notice how you feel. You
Okay.
know, you can do really well with carbohydrate percentages coming up to even 75%, as long as you're meeting your protein needs.
Okay.
Mine is typically 60 to 65% of calories coming from protein. Sorry, from carbohydrate. About 10 to anywhere from 10 to 20 coming from fat, and the rest coming from protein. And like I said, I get up in the 150 range every single day of protein.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I think we gave people a ton to think about. Hopefully, some actionable information.
Yeah.
Can you remind people how they can, follow you, learn more about what you're
Yeah.
doing with
So
Plant Based for
if
Positive Change?
Yeah, so Plant Based for Positive Change is a nonprofit that I started in order to run research studies. So I ran the first controlled trial investigating the effects of nutrition on early addiction recovery outcomes. We talked about it on the last
Yeah.
podcast. Um, you can reach out to me through my website, adamsud.com. If you'd like to work with me as a consultant for helping you reorganize your calories, you can do that. You can book a free discovery call with me through my website. You can also book me as a speaker to talk on everything from addiction recovery to mental health to even insulin resistance. If that talk today didn't bore you, if it attracted you, if you're like, holy shit, this is amazing, and you want me to
Yeah.
come and give a lecture on insulin resistance, I do that as well. So that's
Cool.
where you can find me.
Sweet. Okay. Well, Adam, thanks again for joining me. Guys, if you're listening, well, you're listening right now, so obviously you're listening. Thank you for listening. I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope it inspires you to be a better man, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. If you like that episode, check out this other one right here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed, click this subscribe button over here, and you can listen to the full episodes on any major podcasting platform. Full details below in the description.